Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have 7 new reviews just for you. Before we begin that particular part of the show, I'm going to give a quick shout out to a couple new supporters of the podcast and the Patreon. Christopher Thomas, Brad Thomas, and David Petrie. They were all very generous recent donators and supporters of the show. Christopher Thomas made a very generous donation via PayPal to the podcast. It's going to cover quite a few bills for a couple months. Brad Thomas and David Petrie also became supporters on Patreon. So those guys get a special shout out because they give monthly donations to the show to help keep it going, keep it paid for, without any kind of necessity for like ad revenue or anything like that. So thank you guys for your support, and everyone else, thank you for all the support you give as well for the podcast, sharing the show, using our affiliate links. We get little pennies whenever you buy like an Amazon book using our links, and all the other ways you can find out any other ways you can support the podcast. You can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But on to the regular part of the show. These are the 7 new reviews I'll have for you this week, which includes Codename Freedom, The Goblin Siege. That is going to be the second book in that particular series. We also have Killing Time, The Realms, book number 1.5. I will explain what that means during the review. We also have Desire, A Liberty Adventure, volume number 1. After that, it'll be now, the cover art actually says Reconfigure, but the actual title on Amazon is going to be Dungeon Configuration. So there you go. After that, it'll be Legacy, Reality Gate, book number 1. After that, it'll be Homebrew, a LitRPG novel, Metagamer Chronicles, book number 1. And last but not least, Murder, Death, Chill, a Slaughter Royale LitRPG. So there you go. But before we begin with the reviews, we're going to give you some LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with some a nice little deal that one of the authors is doing for the release of his new book, Apollo's Thorn. He's the reviewer to be given for his second book in the series, but he is trying to promote the novel and, of course, give you folks at home a good deal. He's actually going to run a countdown deal on Amazon for book 1 in this series called Codename Freedom, Survive Week 1. It's going to be 99 cents from April the 13th all the way until April the 15th, which is over a weekend. It'll be 99 cents for that entire time frame. So if you haven't picked it up yet, it's a really good story. I've enjoyed it. I'm reading it multiple times, both on the Royal Road and the finished product version on Amazon. And it will actually still have a reduced price of $1.99 right up until April the 20th, I believe, as well. So nice little deal for you. We'll link in the show notes if you want to go click on that, check it out. Okay, also in some LitRPG news, I was on 2 other podcasts, I should say. I do podcasts, I know. I was on Serious Drinking with Charles Dean. Charles Dean is the author of a couple of LitRPG stories, including War of Eternus, the Bathrobe Night, and no, it's Bathrobe Night, I think it is, yeah, Bathrobe Night, and Merchant of Tikva. He does a nice little podcast channel. I'm on occasionally just to hang out and have fun. It's interesting. But this last weekend, we talked with Dave Wilmarth and Annie Ellicott. Annie actually did a nice reading of Dave's latest book. She did a selected reading of his book called the Undying Land. And Charles got a little picky. He actually had a lot of questions for Dave. It was supposed to be Charles Dean read the book recently, and he was going to like basically do like some pointed questions about issues he had with the novel. And Charles is just very in-depth and particular about some of the things he reads. He does it in love. If he didn't like your book or care, he wouldn't bother. And Dave and him were friends, so it was very good-natured, sort of. But it was a very interesting thing to watch and see, because I know both of them and I talk to them on a fairly regular basis, so it was fun to be to not be the guy interviewing, but also to see how somebody else does it and their conversation piece. And Annie, of course, was there the entire time. She was delightful to have in the group. I just wish we all could have like had more conversation pieces, but one of the questions that that Charles actually asked was he had one about the scientific accuracy of strangelets, which is a sciencey thing, and it's something that is in the Undying Land novel. Kind of justifies the zombie apocalypse-ish kind of theme and part of it. So it was a very pointed question, but I thought it was super hilarious to watch as an outside observer almost. And I know folks in the chat room when they're watching it live had a good time. So go check it out. We'll have a link in the show notes for you to go watch it. Okay. Also, the other podcast I was on recently is called Sci-Fi Shenanigans Podcast. I was there as a guest. The two hosts, I've been doing a 3-part mini series kind of thing about what LitRPG is, talking to an author and a couple fans, and I kind of met both qualifications. They were definitely talking to me more as like the LitRPG podcast guy, but we also talked about the stories that I've written in the past for the genre. But it was just kind of fun hanging out and talking to people and kind of spreading the good news about the LitRPG genre. It was super fun for me. I always enjoy talking to people and introducing them and kind of getting them to hooked into the genre itself. It was super fun for me, so go check it out. It was a nice, fun conversation. And again, that's going to be Sci-Fi Shenanigans episode number 23 with R.A. Mejia. That's me, an R.A. Mejia. Okay, other LitRPG news. We have a couple new Patreons that have popped up for authors you may have read. And if you want to support them, we'll have links in the show notes. First one is, of course, Apollo's Thorn. The guy's just getting all his, ducks in a row. He started a Patreon, including for the Codename Frame series. It's up. We'll have a link in the show notes. Some of the rewards he has for different tiers of supporters include copies of the ebooks, early chapter releases, character naming input, private chats with the author on, I think it's one of the chat programs. Can't remember. Signed paper book copies and more. There are a lot of rewards actually. So go support him there if you're a fan of his work. Okay. Another new Patreon is going to be RJ Castiglione. I'm saying that incorrectly. I know I am. The author has told me several times how to say his name, but he also has a Patreon. He's the author of the Fjorn series. I always think it's a really fun series. It also, though, has a gay main character, which is very unusual, and just in writing in general. So I always appreciate the different view, but I also enjoy the crafting system in the series a lot. It's really fun, but it's a very interesting novel series. If you want to go support the author, if you've read those books and you just want to help support his writing, link in the show notes there. The author doesn't have quite as many tiers of like support as other authors. I actually think he needs more. But some of the rewards for supporters include early access to chapters being written, and an exclusive short story series, as well as a thank you. So yeah, he definitely needs more. More reward tiers for the different levels of people who want to support him. But again, I always think it's good LitRPG, so go support him and his work if you're a fan of his particular series. So again, link in the show notes for you to go check it out. Okay, now this last story is one that's kind of affects more of the author side of the genre, but because you guys are community members, I think it's important that you're aware of it at least, even if you're readers. Recently, Amazon has dropped like a lot of Kindle unlimited page counts for many authors, and even suspended some accounts without any real evidence of wrongdoing on authors' parts. Now, that's not just limited to our community. It's just there's a lot of this stuff happening to a lot of indie authors who post the books to Amazon. But it has impacted some of our writers, including Mars Dorian and some other author. Mars Dorian is the author of The Crystal Crusade. He wrote a post describing his particular experience that he's actually let me like repost and share. So I'll be reading it to you. Posted by Mars Dorian. A bunch of game lit writers like Jeff Sproul, Johnson Key, Lido Spirit Blackman, Eden Red, and I, Mars Dorian, have received a warning from Amazon for unusual borrowing and reading activity. Mine was in German, I live in Berlin, but the message is always the same. We are reaching out to you because we have detected reading or borrowing activity for your books originating from accounts attempting to manipulate Kindle services. These accounts might be related to a third-party marketing service you have used. Please note that you will not receive royalties associated with illegitimate reading or borrowing activity. Now, as again, this is whatever's host. That was the section he received from Amazon. Now, I've heard that Amazon is cracking down on book stuffers, cheaters who artificially increase page size so they get more page reads and thus more money from KU, from the Kindle Unlimited program. But I and assume the writers I mentioned as well have mostly used Facebook ads and or Amazon marketing services to promote their books. And that's at the end of the original post. Now, for me, it seems to kind of be a weird case of like Amazon essentially trying to combat page stuffers and false or paid for reading services that inflate page read counts on Kindle Unlimited, because in that program, the more pages that are read, the more that author gets paid. So it kind of makes sense that some people would try to cheat the system by hiring somebody to like go through page counts for their books and essentially split the profit or just pay them for whatever. That's very sneaky, not nice. But when Amazon cracks down on those particular accounts, it looks like they all also, just to kind of hide their activity, read other novels that people who haven't paid for their services. And that sometimes includes LitRPG author stuff. But because Amazon is kind of blanket punishing people, a lot of page reads have disappeared for people, and it's hurt innocent members of the community. Some authors are losing like a lot of money, upwards of like $800, or like an entire month's of like their Kindle Unlimited reads in some cases, and that's quite a bit of revenue. So it's a very sad thing that's happening. Now, in a particular author's case in our community, author Matt Dinneman is the author of the Dominion of Blade series. He has a book coming out not too long from now. He actually has his account suspended. He lost access to his account. That's the thing he uses to upload his novels, to do pre-orders, to have like the pre-orders there waiting to get ready to go. And he only recently had it reinstated. Amazon also apparently deleted some of his pre-orders that he had there because, again, they literally closed the account down while they were looking at it and whatever they were doing. But he has a novel coming out on the 13th. The account has been reinstated, but I want to make sure you guys know that you might have lost your pre-order. So go check it out just to make sure if you pre-ordered his latest novel for the Dominion of Blade series. It's going to be coming out on April the 13th, which is when most of you are going to be watching this anyway. So even if you lost your pre-order, you can still buy it, hopefully, when it comes out on the 13th exactly. But you might have to actually go and buy it again, or just, go get it again when it goes live. I just want to always recommend, this is tough for some authors, and it does impact a variety of people in different ways. I know at least of half a dozen LitRPG authors personally who have been affected this way as well. So just remember to go support them when you can. You love their stories, and sometimes they need a little extra support. And I know a lot of writers like myself, we don't write unless we have the support and love from the community. We write because we want to make you guys happy, we want to show you good stories. And if you want to let Amazon know that you don't like what they're doing, I have a couple links in the show notes where you can email them or send them messages for feedback, and or just give them a phone call. So they're definitely there to, if you want to share your mind with how they're treating their authors, or the authors in our community at least. So there you go. Again, and that's it for LitRPG news. We have a couple things that are out now that I haven't had a chance to review, and that includes Critical Failure's book number 6. That is actually out right now. It's a super funny series, highly inappropriate humor. It's very much potty jokes and sex jokes, and just the group members goofing around, having a time. It reminds me a lot of like if Clerks was in a LitRPG world, like that kind of humor. So I love it personally, but I know it doesn't work for everybody. But book number 6 is out now, so if you go check that out. Also out now is Absalom's Fate, and as is Span Foster's Slime Gods. So this is the book 2 in that particular series that is out now as well. Also out now, this author let me know that it was out. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have seen it online. It didn't show up in some of my searches. Digitized Online, book number 1. It's a LitRPG Gamelet epic fantasy novel series. So we'll see how that turns out. Also out now is Back in the Game. This is from the author who wrote Inside Out. It's unfortunately not really connected well with the cover art. But this is the one where 4 gaming friends who are playing an MMO, them and their characters switch places. So the 4 friends from our world went to the game world. The 4 characters that they were playing went to the real world. And so it was a very interesting story, but it's hard to see the connection from the cover art, so this is why I mention it. Also out now is Fragment number 12. Frag 12, Rules Free VR MMO Life, volume number 10 is out as now, The Sacred Dungeons. And Loot Kingdom Shadow Edge, written by Eden Red, is also out now as well. So there you go. All those titles are out for you to enjoy. New LitRPG audiobooks. We only have a couple out that I could find. One is Petrie Online box set series, books 1 through 3. It's out now as a collection. You actually get all 3 for the price of 1. It makes it a very actually good deal in my opinion. Also now as is Cherry Blossom Girls as an audiobook. The audio is done by Sun with Theater. It actually has several cast members. I think it has like 4 or 5 people in doing recordings and narrations for that. So some people don't like multiple voice narrators. Some people do. This one has it, so just be aware of that. Also, of course, with all audiobook recommendations or notifications, make sure you listen to a sample before you go purchase, because not every narrator works for everybody. We'll also have a link in the show notes for the ebook reviews for each one of those. So if you want to go see what we thought of the ebook versions. Okay, upcoming LitRPG. This is just me reading off stuff about stuff I know that's coming out in the near future. You can feel free to skip ahead. There are a couple additions to the list, of course. Matt Dinniman's The Hobgoblin Riot, Dominions of Blades, book number 2, the one I was just talking about earlier. That is out on April the 13th. Gia Killa's latest book, Realm of Alcron, book number 7, The Mist of Erantia, will be out April the 17th. Also on April the 17th, it'll be The Iron Veil, a LitRPG Omni-World Adventure. On April the 20th, it'll be Login Accepted. That'll be out there. On April the 23rd, Michael Antonov's latest novel will be Countdown, Reality Benders, book number 1. On April the 24th, Favorable book number 9 will be out, Word and Steel. April the 30th, You're in Game, book number 2. This is a LitRPG short story collection put out by Magic Dome Books. It's a bunch of Russian authors, that they have translated stuff from Russian to English. So there it is. Also out is on May 8th is going to be Questmaster, a LitRPG novella. This one was a little hard to find as well. The May the 10th, it'll be Mightier Still. On May the 10th as well, it'll be Blind Gambit. On May the 17th, World of Karnak, book number 2, The First Crusade, will be out. On May 24th, it'll be God Mode, which is Alter Game book number 3 in that series. May 27th, Kingdom Level 5. May 28th, Trial by Fire, a LitRPG Dragon Rider Adventure, the second book in that series. And May the 30th, Dead Rogue, an NPC Paths book number 1, a new, again, Russian novel that translated into English. So there you go. That's all the stuff I know that's coming up. Again, if you as an author have something you want to add to the list, just send us an email at feedback@geekbytespodcast.com or litrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Either way, or just find us on Facebook. Well, we're there as a LitRPG Podcast. You can send us a message there as well, or on Twitter. Okay, on to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we have 7 new, reviews for you folks at home. We're going to begin with Codename Freedom, The Goblin Siege, written by Apollos Thorne. And I'm actually been talking to Apollos Thorne in the next couple of days, doing an author interview with him. Love his stuff. So it's more than past time I was going to be talking to him. So look for that in the near future. We'll have a link on our Facebook page for the link if you want to watch it live. Okay, this one is 679 pages. It is $5.98. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. After surviving the onslaught of Week 1, Lucius has something to prove. He seeks to train under a living legend in hopes of becoming ready for the Goblin Siege. He isn't the only one looking to train. As his competition grows in strength, he must push himself harder than before. Then the unexpected happens. Players start to unlock abilities. Dun, dun, dun. Sorry, that's my edited. There's only one thing to do when facing impossible odds: train harder. So there you go. Now, full disclosure, I received a copy of the novel for review. I purchased it when it became available. The author sent me a copy of the novel the day it came out. So I can't really call it an advance copy, an ARC. And I did purchase it the exact same day it came out. But it was really nice of him to send it to me. Now, I'll admit right off the bat, I'm a fan of this series. I'm a fan of this author. I've enjoyed everything he's written so far. A lot of it's been very slice of life. He originally started writing most of his stuff on the Royal Road, which is where I first ran into him and this particular series. And it's still among my favorite stories that I've read. This serial online version has been separated into like component parts, edited, polished. There's added content between that and this version, the full published version on Amazon. And each novel actually has a story arc-ish kind of function with the additional content added. This is the second entry into the series. And again, the author gave a good description of what's happening with him. The main character, Lucius, survived the Goblin raid. He's on a starter town and he's doing a little bit of training. He gets the best trainer on earth, like a living legend of martial arts, but that trainer is not everything that you would think of as a normal trainer, which I thought was kind of cool personally. The training combined with the smaller combat scenes, some character and story development actually make up 70% of the novel. So if you're a fan of like training stuff, if you're a fan of like those training scenes in Dragon Ball Z or Rocky, like when Rocky's training to fight Apollo in any of the movies, if you really love that stuff, then you're going to love this story. And I do personally. That's probably the reason I like it so much, is because I like that kind of stuff. It's honestly among like the best training stuff I've ever read. I asked, this is I guess slightly on topic. I talked to the author about his background. He said like he was studying to be an actual sports trainer, a personal trainer, and I think he pulls a lot of the information that he learned into this novel, and it definitely shows like there's a lot of specificity about particular movement. Muscle groups, the things that you do to impact them, like the entire game mechanic system is built around like this more kind of realistic way of looking at physical growth and change, and I love it. I got to say, it's a super fresh way of looking at how to track personal growth instead of just using the regular stats like strength, wisdom, intelligence stuff. The author does something different. And I love it when an author will bring new and original game mechanics because they make me think about, I had never thought about like describing things a certain way. And so it's a really fun experience reading about the training. So, and in addition to that, the actual descriptions of the training it's so accurate and it's so descriptive without being too tediously detailed. And I think that's a fine balance to strike between those two things because it's a hard balance to maintain. But I love it personally. I love being able to visualize exactly how the main character is training, either doing muscle groups or weight training or endurance training, or even just like weapon specialization training with like the spear and the shield. All those things are really real detailed, and I can easily picture each one of the exact movements that are being trained and how they're going to be used in combat. I loved the sword and shield combination so much, actually, that I eventually used that combination in the novel that I wrote, in Adventures in Terra. The main character chooses to use a sword and shield because of this story, because of this one, because I loved how original and useful the spear and shield is. I mean, most fantasy stories, you get swords, right? You get two-handed swords, one-handed swords, maybe a sword and shield if you're lucky, but nobody really uses the spear, even though historically it's like the most widely used weapon, of all time because of how useful and useful and trainable it was. So this story was definitely a huge influence on me as far as like what weapons my main character chose to use in that particular story. That's how much I really like this story. Like I said, the game mechanic stuff I've already mentioned a little bit, but it feels like a lot of stuff and details that you would get from a sports trainer or from a sports medicine stuff. And I thought that was just so spot on and fresh for like this training type of story. And it, again, really cool stuff in there. Like I said, the training stuff is among the best that I've ever read. And like I said, if you love the Dragon Ball Z training stuff that happens there, or in or in Rocky, if you're a fan of those series, because of like that, just the excitement you feel when you're reading or watching about somebody like pushing their limits and working really hard to get better, you're going to love that portion of the story as well. Now, the last 30% of this novel is like this big epic fight scene against the Goblin town. And while there's a lot more combat in that section, I kind of liked it slightly less than the training stuff. And I think for me that was because the scope of this battle it's kind of big for me, I should say. it's too big. That sounds weird, but it was hard for me to kind of imagine the scope, because I think there's something like 10,000 individuals participating in this last battle between like the goblins and like the various guilds of human guilds coming together to like raid this, like conquer this goblin town. And so for me, it's just hard. It was hard for me to picture all those different fights and all those different aspects without everything kind of blurring together. There are a few like smaller individual fight scenes, or just like three versus a group, or like one-on-one, and those are really well done. I enjoy those a lot more. But overall, like the combat felt less personal. And there were like fewer instances of like, oh, me just rooting for somebody that I already cared about, like the main character or some secondary character. So, but again, not badly written or anything. It's just, I think I liked it a little bit less than like the training portion of it. Overall, good novel. The focus on training really worked well for me. But again, I like Rocky movies. I love Hajime no Ippo, which is like another boxing anime, where they focus on like training and stuff. Like those kind of scenes. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a dude, or because I appreciate the growth mechanic of like working really hard to accomplish your goals and do better, and that's your superpower, like your ability to train harder than anybody else, and that making your success, that kind of underdog story, kind of always appeals to me. But if you like that kind of stuff, you'll love this. If you don't, though, if there's going to be a good portion of this that you're just not going to be interested in. So heads up on that. For me, I enjoyed it. It gets a score 7 out of 10. Again, that's a score 7 out of 10 for Codename Freedom: The Goblin Siege. There you go. Okay, on to our next review, Killing Time. The Realms Book 1.5, the humorously epic LitRPG adventure. Written by C.M. Carney. So there you go. Okay, this one is $2. Sorry, $2. 290 pages. It is $2.89. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. What the hell happened to Lex? All Lex wanted was to help his good buddy, Griff, find his sister and maybe save the world along the way. But everything goes wrong from the start when Lex gets separated from Griff during their transfer into the realms. Lost, alone, and forced to live the same day over and over, Lex must defeat the agent of a despotic god, uncover hidden truths about himself, and find his way back to his friend. If he fails, the realms face destruction. So there you go. And the author goes on to describe that this is a short novel that bridges the gap between The Borrow King, which is the first book in the series, and book 2, The Lost City. So there you go. This is a real short review. I don't want to spoil like any of the plots to you, but it's a LitRPG Groundhog Day side story. That's how I'm going to describe it. It focuses on the character Lex. In book 1, he's the sidekick character, like his the main character in book 1's NPC companion that's created for him. But at the very beginning of that novel, they get separated, and the story follows the main character. In this particular story, it's kind of saying what happened to that sidekick, and it really does cover all the points between the time that he was separated from the main character in the first novel, and the time till he is reunited with him, or at least like starts to get in that direction. The main character, Lex, basically has this Groundhog Day experience where he power levels a bunch of skills, reconciles his programming as an NPC versus his free ability to choose and have free will. And it's really interesting to read about the clever ways that the character Lex here tries to exploit the time loop to level and gain a bunch of skills and abilities, and of course, figures out some way to get out of it. If for some people, this might get to be a kind of repetitive experience of reading the same day over and over again. But if you liked Groundhog Day, the movie with Bill Murray, you're probably like this one. There's more fighting here. But it's the same kind of concept of like using the experience of living the same day over and over again to get new skills, to get more powerful. But at the same point, learning about yourself, because there's something in this particular time loop that's stopping you from moving on, from progressing as a human being, or in this case as an NPC, human being, whatever it is. And I have always enjoyed that particular story, but again, some people might find it a little repetitive, but to me it feels very much like a side story. Like I haven't read book 2 yet. It's not available yet. But I have a feeling that this whole time jumping thing is not going to have a huge impact on that, because then also the whole time jumping thing is not explained like where it comes from, other than it's the will of the source, which is a little annoying to me. But at the same time, I remember Groundhog Day doesn't really explain how that happened either. It's more like it just did and accept it. So I was okay with that. For me, I enjoyed it. It was a very interesting, to me, a novel way of telling a story. I've seen people try to do this before and I didn't enjoy it as much. This one was like really well done. There's still progress for the main character Lex in this story, where he does increase his skills, increases his levels. And so, you still have that arc of progression in the story, which I thought was very good, because otherwise I would have been bored out of the heck if he just stayed the same level one the entire novel, and he doesn't, which is awesome. It's going to be a score of 7 out of 10 for me for Killing Time, the Realms book 1.5, a humorously epic lit RPG adventure. So there you go. Okay, on to number 3. It's a Desire, a lit RPG adventure, volume number 1, written by Cameron Milan. Okay, it is 212 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. A mysterious entity decides to bestow certain individuals with a powerful tattoo. With it, anything becomes possible. The world is changing, and it has yet to be determined if it is for the better or for the worse. Two friends who grew up together, Ace and Vincent, decide to use the tattoo to do what they always dreamed of. It doesn't say what. I mean, it doesn't in the description. Okay, this is a real world lit RPG slice of life adventure story. That's how I'm going to describe it to you. It has two main characters, Ace and Vincent. They go exploring. They explore this new RPG mechanic system that they're just endowed with. They fight a bunch of enemies using this new system. They do a bunch of power-ups. They do some quests. And that's kind of what it is. That's all it is. And that's all it really needs to be. That's why it's very slice of life. And for those who don't know what slice of life is, it's where the story doesn't necessarily have a traditional plot line of like, oh, a beginning, middle, end, and there's a whole arc and character developments. It may just be like them just going on adventures. But whatever they're doing, you're following along with them. A recent viewer described slice of life as where like a traditional story would be like a regular single player RPG where you have a set story. A slice of life story would be like the MMOs of LitRPG, where you may do a bunch of smaller quests. There may or may not be some larger arc that's there at some point. So I think it's a good fine description of what slice of life is. Now, I'm going to admit right off the bat that this story is going to be hard for some people to read. The writing is very dry. The dialogue is not amazing, especially towards the middle and end part of the story where there is just this dialogue and it's more combat oriented. Some of the dialogue is literally just them saying a word or two, and so it's not super amazing. But there are some really good things about the story that I really enjoyed. For me, I had a good time with it, but I'm going to say right off the bat, not everybody's going to like this story, and I'll describe what I liked about it. For me, it kind of felt, at least in the beginning, it felt like I was listening to two people or just engaging in conversation where they're arguing and brainstorming about what it would be like if they had RPG powers in real life. Like questions like, oh, what would the system be like? What powers would they take individually? How would that impact the larger social world? And what would bad people do with them? And how would good people respond? It's like they were asking those questions and then writing down the answers, and it kind of became this story. It's a very kind of speculative fiction kind of story where you're just kind of exploring, by the seat of your pants, the things you think might happen if like RPG powers became real for everybody. And it's a very, to me, it's a very fun conversation. Not everybody's gonna like that. If you've ever been one of those people who've been part of the conversation where you can talk to somebody about that nerdy kind of stuff for hours and hours, you're probably like at least the beginning part of the story. If you think that kind of stuff is boring as heck, maybe not. But I do. I actually find that kind of speculative conversations to be really engaging. The game mechanics in this novel are going to be kind of familiar to you. There is a stat system that's pretty standard: strength, wisdom, speed, those kind of things. There's also a quest system that's called tasks and challenges where the two characters complete them, and they provide points that they can then use within this limited system to purchase rewards. And the tasks start out being pretty mundane things like, doing 1,000 push-ups in an hour, you get 1 point. Punch 10 people in the stomach, you get a point. The quests don't specify how you have to do them or how you have to accomplish them. So part of the story is like one character being just super straightforward about it. And the other character being a little more sneaky and figuring out interesting ways of completing the quest, and kind of maybe exploiting the system a little bit, which I thought was super fun. The rewards that they can buy, they're just, they honestly feel kind of random, and it feels like they're all made up. Like there was no comprehensive reward system thought of in advance. It's just like, oh, some rewards, like you can improve your stats, or you can buy new magic powers, or you can buy equipment. But other rewards just seem super out there. Like you can buy, you can learn how to travel at the speed of light for 1 trillion points. Why? I don't know, but it's it feels a little arbitrary occasionally. But it's again, it's kind of a slice of life story, so it's to be expected. While the story again has a very interesting speculative exploration in the beginning, after the 50% mark in the story shifts around a little bit. It becomes less about exploring that system and seeing how it impacts like their community, what other people are doing with it, how the main characters train and fight and gather points. And it becomes more about this overpowered combat sequence where the main characters are just kind of fighting, training, upgrading the powers, and repeating the cycle. And to me, that was just kind of less interesting because it became less about exploring what was possible and more about just like beating people up and getting new powers and kind of seeing how they would fight together. And it just, like I said, I've read that particular concept many times, but the first part of that exploration of the social aspects of it and just kind of the speculative nature of like the conversation, that to me felt interesting, at least. So overall, I like the first half of the story. The second half was less interesting, and again, not well. I can't. Well, it's the combat was okay, I guess I'll say it that way. And like I said, some people are just not going to enjoy it. So I would suggest, if you're thinking about reading this, go read a sample chapter, or if you're on Kindle Unlimited, it doesn't matter. But like I said, you may or may not. Like I liked it for the first half. The second half, not so much. So for me, it gets a score of 6 out of 10. But again, other people's mileage may vary. But I really did enjoy that first like half of the story. I thought it was kind of interesting, if a little dry. That's score 6 out of 10 for Desire, a LitRPG Adventure Volume Number 1. There you go. On to Dungeon Configuration, which is the actual title that says on Amazon instead of the title on the cover, which says Reconfigured. I don't, there you go. Written by Troy Meenan. Okay. This is 240 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Broken and wounded in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, David accidentally makes a deal with something that he has only read about in literature. After a 6-month-long coma, he wakes up to find himself crippled and out of work. Driven by forces that are almost outside of his control, he goes on a quest to learn and understand one of the last things any sane person would wish to know about. Meanwhile, trapped in a boring, dirty, and thankless job, another poor soul watches through a computer screen. Day and night, he works tirelessly to stop, trap, and destroy any who would attempt to both steal his home and ruin his life. Now, I have to say, that is it's not a horrible description, I guess. It is accurate without spoiling things. But it doesn't tell you anything really about the story. Like, it doesn't tell you the good stuff about this novel. And if you look at this cover, it's not very good. It doesn't draw you in. Like, we all have different resources that we have to use to write and describe these things and to get cover art, so it's completely understandable. But don't let the cover art and the novel description fool you. This is a surprisingly good story. It is. It's a LitRPG Dungeon Master Course story that tries really hard to break the few trope that subgenre has. For example, very early in the story, the main character has the chance, as the dungeon, to bond with an adorable looking fairy to get some cool bonuses. Okay, we've read that before, right? But this dungeon doesn't do the thing you think he would do. Instead, he questions why anyone would trust a random magical creature they just met, and why a fairy would be hanging around a dungeon anyways. Then he murders that fairy. He tricks it into murdering itself, and then it reveals itself to be like this evil-looking kind of fairy thing. And bam, trope blowed. And this happens several times in the beginning of this novel, and I thought it was just the beginning of it, like the first 20%. Great, I really did. I think it's great. After that, it becomes a little more traditional in the story path that it ends up coming, but it's still overall a good story. I just thought the beginning was super funny and irreverent to the genre of like Dungeon Master, Dungeon Core stories, and LitRPG in general, because the author actually does reference LitRPG several times in the novel, saying, "Oh, I've read these LitRPG stories about these Dungeon Core stuff, and who the hell would have ever thought that this was going to be the way it is? I don't want to know what these guys are thinking." And I just thought it was super hilarious as like this meta view and commentary on like the genre and you know, and game mastering or Dungeon Core novels kind of stuff. That is super hilarious, personally. And honestly, that section with the fairy dust is kind of the least interesting thing that the author does. Again, with that subgenre of like Dungeon Master, Dungeon Core stuff. He again pokes fun at both at the same time, while actually establishing some really neat RPG mechanics of his own. And especially after the 10% mark, the dungeon actually, this is a tiny bit spoilery, like the dungeon starts out a little more fantasy-ish, but then like the dungeon, the guy who becomes the Dungeon Core, the Dungeon Master, he reconfigures the dungeon as a game system. And so that definitely makes it LitRPG for me, at least. And there's just so many neat things that he does with the Dungeon Master story. I wish that it would have continued longer, personally. I especially love the dungeon's ability to convert building materials into coffee, which potentially has the power to create an infinite supply of coffee for him. And it was super cute. There's a little sign above the coffee machine in the section for the Dungeon Master. It says "Death for Coffee," which I thought was just hilarious as all heck. There's also an interesting thread that ties to the real world, which I don't want to spoil for you because it was a nice kind of little surprise for me. But it does, I want to make you aware that a good portion of the story takes place outside of the dungeon, as the human core copy of the main character gets separated from the dungeon copy. And so it part of the story does follow that character, that person, as he goes around with like these odd dungeon powers. And it's a good portion of the story. So I want to make sure you're aware that this is not entirely a Dungeon Master, Dungeon Core story. A good portion of it takes place outside of that dungeon. Let's see. Like I said, I almost give the story an 8 out of 10 just for the humor attempt and the attempt of being so innovative. However, there are a few like super graphically violent gore, horror, mover-ish scenes that I just didn't care for. Like, I was like, oh, is it over yet? Nope. Still, that thing's still murdering people like that. And it's not my thing. Slasher films and horror movie stuff it's not appealing to me. And again, the scenes aren't badly written or anything. I'm not saying anything like that. It's just, that's not my thing. I don't like those super gory like horror slasher films. So if you're into that, cool. I'm not saying, for me, it kind of brought it down a little bit. Also, again, the Dungeon Master, Dungeon Core storyline, it doesn't extend to the majority of the novel. And I wish there was just more of it, because that's the thing I really thought was super innovative, super interesting. So it is what it is. Overall, even though there were a few places I had to push through on the story, I enjoyed reading it. It really was, like I said, surprisingly good. If you enjoy cheeky humor, irreverent attitudes to established LitRPG novels and Dungeon Master Core stuff, you'll like this as well. But you can tell from I thought the attitude was coming from someone who likes the genre, but just sees places to improve. And so they write the kind of story that they wanted to read, which I can absolutely appreciate. That's one of the reasons a lot of us write in the genre, is because we see stories like, I think I can do better, or I have a different opinion or a different viewpoint on this, and they write their own thing. And I always wish them well, because their originality helps to build the genre. Anytime anybody brings something new to the table, something different, but without abandoning the genre entirely, it's always super fun for me to read. And I enjoyed this one a lot. It gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. That's Dungeon Configuration, with a score of 7 out of 10 for me. There you go. Okay. Number 5, Legacy. This is Reality Gate book number 1, written by Phil Maxey. Okay, it is 273 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Aiden Cobb's 18th birthday started with him going under the wall to where the digits lived. His quest was to find something called a Cyron 3000. His best friend Joel told him he could get insulin for it for his grandma. Medicine was hard to come by in the Forgotten Zones, and there was no way he was going to return without it. There you go. That's the author's description, which doesn't connect to that picture on the cover at all. Okay. There are a lot of confusing concepts running through this story, and it has kind of a slow start, and it's confusing in the beginning, to be honest. I'd say, honestly, you could skip the first 6% of it. If you want to try the story out, everything before that is just confusing and unclear, and it isn't explained until like 15-20% in the story. The beginning of the novel is set up as a dystopian Earth where people are divided into two groups, one with all the resources and the technology, the digits, and the others who live outside in the wild and do what they can to survive. Aiden, the main character, breaks into the digits area and steals tech he plans to sell to get medicine for his grandma. The first time the main character logs into the game, he does some light exploring and fighting. And it's not really explained what's happening, and even the main character is super confusing. About the 20% mark, the story shifts to one about an evil corporation that is trying to take over the galaxy. The main character discovers the tech he stole conveniently allows him to log into a remote exploration system that's set up like a game. The system sends advanced 3D printers out beyond the solar system and then transmits the minds of players to control a robot-like machine that is used to catalog new resources, alien technology, new biology, and anything else the corporation can use to further their agenda. About the 40% mark, the story shifts again to a science fiction-ish fantasy setting, where the main character in his robotic avatar is trying to help this medieval society free themselves from the rule of the evil king and his sorcerers, and the sorcerers just happen to be other players in the robotic avatars. Okay, so that's what the story is. It's a little spoiler if you were going to plan to read it, so I apologize for that. I didn't warn you in advance. But the game mechanics on the story are something that's a little confusing at first. I don't mind the mechanics. It feels a little bit out of place in the sci-fi fantasy section of it. The RPG mechanics of the story is essentially this. There's a 3D printer, robots that are sent to this unexplored worlds. Right, we established that. They started as level 1 robots, and they're only 4 inches tall, which makes sense if you're transporting matter across, vast distances. As they scan new plant life, animal life, accomplish research goals, defeat aggressive species of insects or whatever, and learn about alien technology societies, these little guys get experience points, and that experience points is converted into credits. They can be used to print out anything back on Earth with the player, or used by that little machine as a 3D printer to make things that it'll use. Eventually, when they get enough experience points, the abilities of this little robot expand. It can actually grow to human sizes, and as they level up, basically, they can get bigger and bigger and get more complex abilities. And as the avatar explores and unlocks other things, they actually get special skills as an avatar, including things like environmental skills, communication skills with alien cultures, alien custom skills where they can learn what they're doing and what the meaning is behind the actions, and those skills actually level up in 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 whatever with corresponding bonuses. So that's what the RPG mechanics are for this particular novel. Now, as a concept, it's actually a really neat story. It's a really neat concept, I should say. I really like the idea of using shipping out 3D printers and building remote controlled robots that people can use like a full immersion game. I thought that was a really interesting concept, but very fresh to me. And it's definitely something that is almost sci-fi speculative nature. And I did like the RPG system in that portion of it because it felt new in that it rewarded exploration as much as it did combat. And it rewarded research and understanding of alien cultures, again, as much as it did just fighting. And I thought that was kind of neat. However, again, there are a lot of questions here that don't really make sense. There are things like, okay, why... and a lot of these questions come out after the 40% mark when the story shifts to this fantasy concept where it's essentially the robots and Avatarians fighting a bunch of other humans, beating them up, fighting trolls, to help other humans. And that storyline, it just seems more, it feels like I've read it too many times. Like it's just a regular storyline, beating them up, advancing some quests. There's still experience. So the RPG stuff still continues on, but it feels very much as fantasy adventure. And that's not the part that I kind of really enjoyed the most. It really is a shift in the storyline. And at that point, when that storyline shifts, beating the big evil corporation by helping these medieval humans in some way or shape or form, that's how they're going to help. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like, why is this super powerful advanced corporation not just taking over these entire planets. It has the tech to make a bunch of 3D robots. Why do they need to use players with swords to, take over planets? Or why does it need them transform into dragons? Why can't they use machine guns or lasers or whatever else? They do this, and there were more questions that I thought that the story answered. It wasn't as interesting to me. I really did like that beginning section of like from the 19% to the 33% mark. I thought that section was really, really good. Unfortunately, it's a minority portion of the story. It's roughly 15% of the story. And it's a really interesting sci-fi LitRPG section that I thought that where the game mechanics were used to incentivize exploration. Really nicely done. That's probably my favorite part of this entire story. But the rest of the novel just doesn't make sense, or according to the tech given, it was just confusing in a lot of different ways. And it just, it's a decent action adventure story. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just that I think the story missed a great opportunity to be like really, really good. And that's a personal opinion, I guess. For me, it just lost that, enjoyment level for me. Again, not bad, not even boring. It's just not as entertaining as it started out as. So for me, it gets a score of 6 out of 10. That's Legacy Reality Gate book number 1 with a score of 6 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to Homebrew, a LitRPG novel, Metagamer Chronicles, book number 1. It is 349 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. If Gary had known he'd get trapped in an RPG with his real-life stats, he'd have tried harder in gym class. Gary Burns just wanted to create the greatest RPG campaign of his gaming career, but a freak magical accident sucks him into the very world he created as himself. Surrounded by heroes who look and sound like his friends, Gary is forced to play out the story he wrote. Worthless in a fight, Gary must prove himself valuable, even if it means feeding the team insider knowledge, because he needs to keep his friends close and himself alive until he can solve the puzzle he never designed: how to get everyone back home. So there you go. This is a trapped in a tabletop slice of life story. There you go. I think it's important to note the slice of life part because I honestly went into this, reading this, expecting some kind of 3-4 act structure involving this trapped in the game group working together and trying to escape the game. And it's not that. It really isn't. So don't expect that kind of storyline. Most of it is just the main character following his friends around as they go on adventures, and eventually just making some decisions, which we'll go into in a second. But that's kind of what it is. Let's see. Instead, the group is transported to a custom-made homebrew game tabletop system. Everyone arrives as their characters and don't remember being anything else, except for the main character, Gary. He's the DM. He's the one who made all the rules. He created all the lore. He made all the game mechanics in this world. But he's transported to the game as himself, wearing his normal jeans, shirts, and his sneakers. He's the only one that sees the dice rolls, gets the game notifications, and sees his character sheet. So the first half of the story really does just follow the group as they go on adventures and begins the quest line that the main character planned out as the dungeon master. The main character feels like he's just tagging along as this non-combat bard. It's not really until like the 50% mark in the story where the main character starts to believe that he's living in this world and not just an observer who gives out hints to his teams about quest lines. At that point, the main character actually starts to use his knowledge about the game world, and he creates for his own benefit. So he kind of starts using his insider knowledge to benefit him in the group. And all that knowledge becomes this kind of superpower that he tries to exploit to survive and to help his team out. It's honestly a much more interesting storyline at that point than just reading about some guy who's watching other people play, which what the first half of the story kind of feels like. So for me, this didn't really start getting good until like halfway into it, which is unfortunate. Game mechanic wise, it's an interesting mix. The game elements that are there, you see through the eyes of the main character, and he's kind of the only one who sees the game stuff, but it's really rather detailed. You get your standard stat system, you get your XP levels, all that good stuff. You don't get a health or mana bar. That's kind of a story choice that the author made, so he wouldn't have to do necessarily like a bunch of information for everybody. Like I said, personal choice. It's explained why and like the custom game rules for the homebrew game system. But one of the things I really did like seeing is the actual dice rolls. That's right. There are actual dice rolls here. And from the description and from what the author has said about the novel, I feel like he actually made the dice rolls count. Like they actually impacted the story. And when you see them, sometimes those dice rolls are bad and they suck and they have negative consequences to the storyline, which I thought was really cool. It's a really interesting way of actually writing your story. Everything from bluff checks to damage rolls are shown. That includes formulas for bonuses. For example, the actual roll for convincing a guard not to arrest the main character. D20 die is rolled, and it's 18 plus persuasion plus 4, which is 22, and that was good enough to get him through. That's as an example of like what kind of dice rolls you're actually seeing. You're actually seeing the whole formula, including bonuses and the roll, and whether or not the check passes in the story. So again, sometimes they're just bad rolls that actually shift the way the story goes at some point. I remember there's one point in the character where like the ranger finds clues about like, oh, maybe there's some else around here, and that's kind of her big quest line, but she fails a search check, so she never really discovers where that might have led to, and the whole group kind of just moves on to the next storyline. It's like, oh, there was actually a role there possibly that changed the way the story was possibly going to go, and I thought it was a really innovative way of doing your story. And I know other authors do that, but they don't always show the rolls. Like I know Dakota Kraut, he actually does dice rolls when he's doing combat, when he's doing like some of his stuff. So it actually impacts the story. He just doesn't actually show the dice rolls. And this one does. And I thought that was kind of neat, at least for me. I don't doubt that there's a little fudging in some of these. Like when the main character, I think there was at least one place where I was like, that guy should have died. That was a bad dice roll. And there were just like bonuses given by the dungeon master saying, you know, just to get him right over that hump so he wouldn't be murdered, with those like little helpful points. But that's okay. Like I said, it's you still feel like these dice rolls matter, which is, I think, was the core of like this concept. Overall, I think the series has like really good potential. And I liked it once I adjusted my expectations and the main character started to be interesting. I really didn't have a good time with it. And said there's a really good like metal ending where the main character eventually powers up at the end. I thought was kind of cool. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it was enjoyable to me. I thought it was like really super funny and interesting. For me, I enjoyed it, even though like I didn't start to really have a good time until like halfway into it. The first half isn't boring. It is just like very slice of life where you're just going on adventures with the main character. And so just be aware that when you're starting this out. Overall, again, it scores 7 out of 10 for Homebrew, a LitRPG novel, Metagamer Chronicles, book number 1. There you go. On to our last review. It is going to be Murder, Death, Chill, a Slaughter Royale LitRPG written by W.A. Clooney. Okay. It is 25 pages. It's a short story, folks. 99 cents. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'm going to read you my description of the story because the author just takes quotes from the novel and puts it as a description, which doesn't really help you out that much. Okay, this is a quick introduction and happens at the beginning of the novel for a competitive online combat game. Slaughter Royale Online. Hundreds of players enter, each with their own builds, but only the top 10 win prize money. Everyone spawns in random locations with nothing except a gray unitard. Players can craft their gear and weapons, or trade and loot the stuff others make, if they want equipment. The female main character, Angel O'Death, is witty, snarky, and an aggressive fighter. In combat, she combines an elegant leaping style fighting with ground and pound brutality. So basically, this story is about this tournament. It's an online tournament, like full immersion game. The main character, she fights against like a wide variety of opponents with different playstyles. There's a little bit of crafting, but it really is more action focused, and it's just kind of a bunch of combat. There's like a subtle secondary storyline about trusting other players. That was a good addition to the story. But like I said, most of it is just she fights some dudes, and she kicks butt and takes damage, which is always enjoyable. And the ending leaves potential for some very cool things to come down the line, I think. I enjoyed it. Again, it's not a long review. It's not a long book. Score is 7 out of 10. Had a good time with it. It's short, good action-y stuff. I liked it. That's Murder, Death, Chill, a Slaughter Royale LitRPG. And there you go. That's it. We're done. Show's over. Thank you for listening, for watching me. If you want to follow the podcast, you can find all the ways to do so in our show notes or Twitter. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on YouTube, we're on Patreon. Plenty of link in the show notes for all those places if you want to follow the podcast, see what we're doing, see the reviews. We actually have written versions of all these reviews if you want to read them on our website or on our Facebook page. Feel free to go follow us. You can also get notified anytime a new YouTube video before the podcast comes out if you go and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, if you want to support the podcast in any way, shape, or form, you can find out all the ways you do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Thanks again for hanging out with me, ladies and gentlemen. And again, until we can hang out again and you can see me just enthusiastically spout off stuff about LitRPG, until we can hang out, folks, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.